Hello. We'll give everybody a few minutes to come on in. We're just getting everybody a few seconds to get joined into the meeting, and then we will get started. All right, it is 12:01. We're going to go ahead and get started. So I am Dr. Sturgis. I currently serve as Assistant Dean for Academic Advising at the Medical College of Georgia. Clinically, I am an emergency medicine physician there as well. So I would like to start by welcoming everyone to this session. We are so pleased that you have chosen to join us on today. But before we get started, I have a few just housekeeping and reminders that we'd like to remind everyone about. This session is going to be recorded and it will be available in about 24 hours in the auditorium, the virtual auditorium. This is also going to have a pretty robust question and answer session at the end. So we ask that you hold all of your questions. We're going to be able to chime in and answer any of your questions. But if you have questions that pop up during the session, we ask that you drop them in the chat. I will be going through those and picking out questions while Dr. Wynn is speaking. So feel free to add those to the chat while she's presenting. And then if you have any additional questions after this session is over related to the MCAT, you will have an opportunity to speak with AAMC representatives tomorrow at the fair from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So at this point, we would like to just kind of give you a reminder of and a heads up of the way the session will flow. Dr. Wynn's going to focus on three very important topics today. The first is a growth mindset, and that's pretty much just letting you understand that there really there's no such thing as a bad test taker, right? You have to look at this as an opportunity to grow. Everyone's able to improve. Everyone is able to acquire the skills necessary to achieve the outcomes that they desire. And then she's also going to spend some time just reframing the narrative around the MCAT and maybe some beliefs you have about the MCAT. And then she's going to top it off with some tools, some important tools that you can all use and acquire to really help yourself achieve your goals. So before we get started with that, I'd also like to just spend a second talking about lifelong learning and why these tools are so important. Most of you have already jumped the first hurdle of taking the SAT and the ACT, and you're now at the point of having to sit down to take the MCAT. But it's important to understand that in medicine, in academic medicine, along my own personal journey, we've gone from MCAT to the repetitive exams that you have during your preclinical component of the curriculum. You also have step 1, you have your clinical exams, and you go on to take step 2. And then every year during residency, there's also exams that we had to take. And during your residency time, you take step 3 of the USMLE boards. And then when you're all done with residency, you sit for your specialty boards. For me, that was emergency medicine. So the skills that Dr. Wynn is going to talk to you about today are critical to your lifelong learning process in medicine, because if these are skills that you can acquire now, they're skills that you will use throughout your entire career. So we are super excited to offer this to you. These are things that I wish I had known when I was in your seat, when I was at this point in my education. So to consider this a gift that you're being given to acquire these skills at this stage of the game. So before we get started with her presentation, we would like to poll the group just to see exactly when everyone is planning to take the MCAT. This will help us kind of gauge. So you should have a poll that's popped up on your screen. When are you planning to take the MCAT? Is it primarily in January, March to May, June to August, September, or I plan to take it sometime in 2025 or beyond? Okay, it looks like the front runner is March to May, but pretty much by May, it looks like about 75% of you will be taking the MCAT in the first half of the year. That's definitely useful information for us to capture during this presentation, and that Dr. Wynn will be able to respond to that. So at this point, I would like to introduce, oops, I think I can share the results. There we go. So you can see the majority of people are going to take it March to May, and then January also has a pretty significant number of students. So at this point, I would like to introduce Dr. Wynn. She is a medical education learning specialist at the Frist College of Belmont in Nashville, Tennessee. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and attending and spending a little time here with us today. As Dr. Sturgis says, I'm Dr. Wynn. And yes, by trade, I do consider myself a medical education learning specialist, but have enjoyed my time at the new Frist College of Medicine at Belmont that just got preliminary accreditation last week. So that's cool. That was great news. And so want to spend a little bit of time talking with you today and hopefully sharing some information that will help you along your journey. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So first I want to start by setting the stage, right, of this portion of your journey and have a shared understanding that medical schools and the healthcare industry, they're searching for individuals who display growth, reflection, and resiliency within assessment. They're not looking for perfection. You don't have to have it all figured out, but you do have to be willing to grow, right? And over the last 10 years or so of coaching MCAT, I've seen this span all the way from students who are like, I'm not in the right mindset that I need to be to tackle the MCAT right now, all the way to students who dig in and face some of the bumps in the road that they might have had with this exam, but they keep trying and they keep growing and they keep reflecting and they show that resiliency within assessment, and that's going to come out to medical schools. And that doesn't mean you're taking the MCAT multiple times. It just means during the process, you really dug in to understand and make sure that you're growing within that, right? So when I talk about assessments, there's a lot of different assessments. And you just heard from Dr. Sturgis, who has both an MD and a PhD, that along her journey, there were so many assessments. And we're not just talking about quizzes and exams. There is self-testing, there's journaling, there's self-reflection exercises, there's, you're constantly having to take a look at what you're doing. How are you doing for your patients? How are cases coming along, right? Like you're constantly having to look inward and assess what went right and what went wrong. That's also a part of this journey. And for the purposes of the conversation today, we're going to focus on the quizzes and exam portion. However, just remember that assessments happen in so many different forms on your road to becoming a physician, okay? So what is the ultimate purpose of the MCAT as an assessment? Like, why is this part of this particular journey. And that is because medical schools want to ensure your critical thinking and application skills before entering medical school. So it's not an exam that's trying to prevent you from becoming a doctor or ruin your life or anything like that. They're trying to actually help you and give you a baseline understanding of that critical thinking, but before you move on to the next phase of the process, which includes more of that. Okay. Let's talk about, though, why this can feel abrupt and it can feel different than what you've experienced in the past. And that's because when you're going through K through 12 education, and then 13, 14, 15, 16 is what you've experienced during your undergraduate education, the majority of exams, if not all of those exams, are correct answer exams, which means if you have 4 answer choices, 3 of the answer choices are incorrect. They're flat out wrong. And 1 answer choice is correct. So if you think about how many years you've spent conditioning your brain for correct answer exams, and you've nailed it. And you might have a 3.8 GPA, a 4.0 GPA, and you're like, yes, this worked really well. And I'm great at correct answer exams. Why the MCAT can feel so abrupt is because in medical education, starting with the MCAT, so this doesn't start when you get into medical school, it starts with the MCAT, that narrative flips, and we no longer are answering correct answer exams. It becomes best answer exams. And what a best answer exam means is out of 4 answer choices, they're all somewhat correct. It's no longer, well, these are blatantly wrong and this one's right. They're all somewhat correct. You're looking for the answer choice that's best. And that starts with the MCAT. So that's why it can feel very abrupt in what you're doing. Is because your brain is not used to thinking in this way. Mind you, I said it's not used to it. You can train your brain to think in a different way. And we're going to talk about some of that today. Okay. So why are all medical education exams best answer exams, right? It's not to make your life miserable. Let's talk about the purpose of the MCAT and then, the subsequent exams. So it's the first step of thinking like a doctor, because best equals more or most likely. Okay. So let's give you an example here. Okay. If a patient has a cough, you as a future physician, I want you to imagine there is a patient in your office that has a cough. Could that patient have lung cancer if they have a cough? Okay. The answer is technically yes. If you look at the symptoms of lung cancer, cough is on the list, right? So that has to appear anything that a patient could have a cough, like any disease or any infection where a patient can have a cough has to be on your list, right? So that might be cold, flu, COVID, bronchitis, strep throat, like any of those things, right? Lung cancer has to be included on that list, okay? However, when we think of the likelihood of someone being in your office and having lung cancer, right? There's certain things that are going to heighten that awareness for you. Let's say the person's a smoker and they've been smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day for the last 25 years. Lung cancer is going to go a little higher on your list. Let's say this person works around toxic chemicals and they breathe in toxic chemicals all the time. Might go a little higher on your list. It doesn't mean they have lung cancer. It means lung cancer becomes more likely. Okay. As opposed to, let's say the person in your office with a cough is a non-smoker. They've never smoked. No one in their family ever smokes. They've never been around secondhand smoke. Okay, let's say they're a teacher. They don't work around toxic chemicals. They're a kindergarten teacher, right? It doesn't mean they don't have lung cancer. It means it's less likely, right? So if you think about the 4 different options, they go like, in terms of your answer choices, things go higher on your list when they're more likely and lower on your list when they're less likely. That is why all of your exams in medical education are best answer exams. It doesn't mean it's not the answer. It means it's either more likely or less likely. Again, this is different from what you've experienced. And anything we're doing in life that's new has to be learned. Everything we've done since we were born that was new, that we've never been exposed to before, you learned it, right? So when we think about this session, and give me 1 second here. Okay. When we think about this session and we think about you seeing yourself inside this journey, some intrusive thoughts might start taking over, right? And some of those intrusive thoughts could be, I'm a pretty good test taker. I'm a very good test taker, right? And what sometimes people will attribute to being a good test taker to is I don't get nervous when I sit down. Um, I generally feel like the answer comes to me very quickly. The timer doesn't bother me. I know if I sit down and study, I'm going to get an A on the exam. These are things sometimes students will think about themselves as a good test taker, as opposed to students who think they are a bad test taker, will say, well, I get really nervous when I sit down. So I'm kind of attributing that to being a bad test taker, or my mind goes blank when I sit down. Or you start out this process thinking it's not going to go very well because what your history says, right? These are all thoughts that you have to fight in terms of being a good or bad test taker. Why? Because there's no such thing as a good or bad test taker. In fact, there's no genetic marker or there's no test taking gene. It doesn't exist. No one is born naturally good at taking exams. No one came out the womb and their parents are like, they're the best little test taker I've ever met, right? That's not true. If you think about you as a correct answer test taker that you've experienced in K through 16, and if you say, I'm a good test taker, that's because you've practiced taking correct answer exams almost your whole life, right? So it was a skill that was learned over time. Again, this is not something that was natural. You weren't born with it, you acquired it over time. However, sometimes students will interpret being a bad test taker with an anxiety response to taking exams, right? And I'm talking about for students who have adequately prepared for their exam. Sometimes an anxiety response while you're taking an exam can mimic your body's flight or fight response, right? So you sit down and you feel like you've prepared, but all of a sudden anxiety creeps in and your mind goes blank, right? That's your body's flight response going, uh-oh, we're feeling uncomfortable, we're in danger, let's go on vacation, I'm out of here, right? And that's very frustrating. The fight response for students that sometimes will say, I feel like I'm a good test taker. When that anxiety response comes on, they go towards the exam. They dig in even deeper into their brain to pull out the information that's there. Again, you can train your body to fight against that flight response and switch it over to the fight response if you are feeling any kind of anxiety. The other thing that impacts this, where students kind of see themselves as good or bad standardized test takers, is perfectionism, overthinking, underthinking, low academic self-efficacy, which means your belief in yourself as a test taker, or parental pressure. These are all things that impact test performance. But this doesn't mean you're a bad test taker, right? It means you might have some areas that you need to work on, but we all have areas that we need to work on. And again, these things can be rectified. These things can be changed. And we're going to talk about a little bit of that today. Okay. So let's examine why it's important to conquer the MCAT before getting into medical school. And this is what Dr. Sturgis talked about, right? So Dr. Sturgis took you through that lifeline of assessments all the way from MCAT to residency exams and beyond. You conquer the skills of thinking like a doctor. Is this more likely or less likely? More likely or less likely? If you conquer that skill during the MCAT process, it makes all the other exams a lot more easier to conquer once you get in and the information grows. You're going to hear from a first-year medical student in a minute about the amount of information and how they've been handling that. But all of this, this is just the first step. And again, the more you train for this, the more that the other steps beyond this will fall into place. Okay, so let's talk about some study strategies. Okay, so first, if you're like, hey, Dr. Wynn, this also sounds great, but I need help in terms of getting started, right? So as I take you through some of these study strategies, I'm going to point out where if you're thinking today, I'm not a good test taker, I'm going to debunk that. If you are someone who has taken the MCAT more than once and you're going to attempt it again, I'm going to debunk everything that you're thinking about yourself as a bad test taker. Okay. So first off, you're not a bad test taker. You might not have had a great foundation when you got started. And that's just the truth, right? Anything that we're starting and we're trying to learn has to be built on a great foundation. If you didn't start out on a great foundation, the rest of what you were doing probably started to fall apart a little bit because the foundation wasn't good, right? The AAMC has this fantastic resource on their website called How to Create a Study Plan for the MCAT. Please, I beg of you to go on their website and click through this. It's a great manual that takes you through 6 steps that you need to do. And it's going to make sure that you're starting out on a great foundation. So this is an excellent starting point, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed. Go here first, and then you can fill in other resources that you need after that. Okay. Now, again, you're not a bad test taker. The foundation might have been rocky when you first started, including you wouldn't believe the amount of students that I've talked to over the last 10 years that oftentimes have no clue what's even on the MCAT. And I'm like, how are we going to take a test and we have no clue what's on it, right? You're not a bad standardized test taker. You might just have no clue what you're studying. I mean, think about if you went into class as an undergrad, and you're sitting in class and you turn to your neighbor and say, what's this class about? And what class am I signed up for? You He's having never watched a preview. And what's this movie about? What movie are we watching? You don't do that, right? You go in with some idea of information you need to gain. For those of you who are taking the MCAT in 2025 or beyond, this document should be saved on your computer. It should be up, it should be saved. Not only does the document outline everything that you need to do in terms of, or everything you need to learn in terms of the MCAT, it also tells you when you should have learned it, right? So become familiar with the exam, what's on the MCAT. Not enough students are clicking on this link for me. So we're gonna change that today. Again, you're not a bad standardized test taker. You might just not know what you're supposed to be studying, okay? Time management is huge for the MCAT. You're not a bad standardized test taker. Your time management just might not be as tight as it needs to be, right? And this is a huge mistake that I've seen students make where they don't reserve enough time and space for the MCAT. That has to be reserved. It has to be preserved. Now, I understand that you guys are all extremely busy. There are so many demands made upon your time from friends and family and employment, coursework, extracurricular activities, passion projects that you're doing. I understand that you are very busy. However, you have to give yourself enough time to complete this. Part of this is going to be a little bit of a season of no, where you can't do everything and you have to recognize some of those limitations. It's not forever, it's just for a season, and you're going to have many more of those seasons along your medical school journey as well. So you're not a bad standardized test taker. Your time management, or how much time you think you need to actually study for the MCAT, might just be confused, right? So I'm going to give you some schedule considerations to think about. You could say, oh yeah, I need more time or I need less time, right? So you will need more time to study for the MCAT if you're missing some of your prereqs. Because if you haven't taken OChem 2 and you're like, okay, I'm going to teach myself OChem 2, or you haven't taken, psych, you're going to have to teach yourself that information. And so I see students kind of, they don't give themselves enough time to actually do that, because you're going to, the information that you would have received in class, you're going to have to now do that at home. If you have a lower science GPA, you're going to have to give yourself more time. you know when it wasn't quite doing what it was supposed to do when you were sitting in that class, right? If you got a C, that means there was information that wasn't learned. You're going to have to go back and learn that information. It didn't just disappear into thin air. It's on the MCAT. So if your science GPA is not where you were really wanting it to be, you're going to have to give yourself more time. Okay. If you are extremely busy, you are going to have to give yourself more time to study for the MCAT. It's just the math isn't mathing. There's only 24 hours in a day. You're either going to have to cut some of the activities that you're involved in, or you're just going to have to give yourself more time for the MCAT, right? Or the further you are away from content, you're going to have to give yourself more time. There's more to review. You haven't seen this stuff. Sometimes I say, I haven't seen this stuff in a couple years, and I'm studying for the MCAT for 3 months. I'm like, wow, that's going to be tight, right? So you are not a bad test taker. You just didn't give yourself enough time, or you're not planning on giving yourself enough time to actually get the score that you are wanting to get and that we know that you can achieve. Okay, I want to talk about review versus learning, because this is another pitfall that I see students make in terms of thinking of themselves as a standardized test taker, right? I hear students use these words interchangeably, review and learning. They're two completely different things, okay? Review implies if you're going to sit down and review something, it means you previously learned it, you're refreshing your memory on it. Versus learning something is, I don't know this, I've never seen this before, or it was presented to me in my prereq classes and I didn't learn it then. A lot of this takes a lot of brutal honesty with yourself to say, hey, I didn't learn that concept when I was sitting in class. That doesn't get to go in the review category. It has to go in the learning category, because it needs some more love applied to it, right? So you're not a bad standardized test taker. You're just mixing up what concepts need to be reviewed and what concepts need to be learned. And if you're going to learn something, you have to give yourself more time to do that, because it's going to take a while to get it to, okay, I'm just reviewing, I'm refreshing my memory on it, and then it'll come back to you fairly quickly. Okay, so you're sitting here saying, well, Dr. Wynn, how do I know? Can you give us a really easy way to know, do I need to review? Am I just at the review mode for this, or am I at learn mode for this, right? I'm gonna give you a super simple trick I use with all my students to know if you're in review mode or learn mode. 50%. I want you to burn this percentage into your brain, 50%. If you do a set of questions to practice for the MCAT and you get below a 50%, come on now, we all know what below 50% means, right? I have students say, well, I need to do a practice exam to see how I'm doing. I'm like, but all these sections are at 30%. So it's not going to magically change. You have to do something to make it change, right? 50% means I'm getting half of my questions correct. So you're going to be in learn mode if you do a set of questions and they're below 50%. Come on, that 40% in OChem needs some love. Give it some love, right? Spend some time with it. Or if you do a set of questions and your Gen Chem is at a 63%, we're in review mode for that, right? 50% is always your baseline. You don't even need to constantly at the beginning take these full-length exams, because if you sit down and everything's under 50%, give it some love. You're not a bad standardized test taker. You're not giving the areas love that need love. Okay, so let's talk about retrieval practice, which is one of my favorite subjects. Retrieval practice is the art of recalling concepts from memory in order to enhance learning, strengthen connections, and increase the chances that you'll be able to recall it in the future. Most of you guys just view this as taking practice questions or answering practice questions or taking practice exams. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about now. So again, you're not a bad standardized test taker, or you shouldn't view yourself as a bad standardized test taker. You might just not have done enough retrieval practice that you need to do, okay? So I'm gonna prove it to you that this happens all the time in life in terms of understanding what we need to do to perform. And in order to get a really good score on the MCAT, you have to have your content nailed down and you have to practice, right? So you have to understand the material and you have to be able to apply the material. And I'm going to give you a real life example of how this happens. Many of you are going to be extremely aware of this. Content plus practice, right? If you look at this picture on the screen, I want you to look at for a second and look at what this team is doing. They're watching film. They're sitting in a classroom watching film, right? So this is a football team that is learning the other team's plays. They're studying content. They're studying how the other team moves and formations and patterns. They're not out on the field. They're learning and they're gaining knowledge, right? So the knowledge is coming into their brain, right? Then they add that to practice, right? So any team, and I know for myself, I'm a big Bengals fan, and it's a little rocky right now. So I'm like, do we need to go back in the classroom and watch some more film, or do we need to be on the field a little bit more, right? Both of those things have to come together. No team is going to the Super Bowl without both of these things coming together. You're no exception. You're not going to cut out content and just do a ton of practice and say, well, there's my 520, I'm all good. Again, and you're not going to practice without doing any content and say, well, I got my score, I'm all good. Both of these things have to come together for success. And you need to make sure that you're doing both of them equally. And this happens so many times in life. Content plus practice, content plus practice, content plus practice, over and over and over again. So you're not a bad standardized test taker. You just need to evaluate, do I need to watch more film or do I need to get out on the field? And you might not have done the best job at one of these things. And if you improve that and do more of that, you will see a difference in your score. Okay. Practice, 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 practice is so incredibly important. How many practice questions do you need to complete before sitting for the exam? My magical number is around 3,500. And this is because you need to be able to understand how the questions are written, and you need to engage in retrieval practice, right? So this means the information was previously learned, it's in your brain, and for this amount of times, you're going to practice pulling that information out of your brain, okay? And you do have to practice this a lot. It has to be combined with content. So you're not a bad standardized test taker. You might not have practiced enough. And if you're hearing my voice today and this is your second attempt or third attempt at taking the MCAT, you need to go back and do some calculations of, did I practice this much? Now, this doesn't mean you're just aimlessly clicking through the questions. I could answer 3,500 questions and not get a great score on the MCAT. It's not about answering the questions. It's about, what did you learn from it? The art of the retrieval practice, going through it, right? Understanding how the questions are written. If you get something right, what went right? If you get something wrong, what went wrong? You have to go through all of that in order to raise your score and gain a good understanding of moving through this material. Okay. Again, I'm going to bring back up my magical percentage. When you are working through this amount of questions, again, you have to ask yourself, where am I in relationship to 50%? Because I see students all the time. Okay, Dr. Wynn, I got my questions done. I'm like, well, it's at a 20%. That means that information needs to go back and be learned again. And then you have to try another set of questions to see, okay, where am I now in relationship to the 50%? You have to keep doing that back and forth movement until you raise this up above 50%. And you don't want to just stop at 50%. Don't say, oh, well, Dr. Wynn said I hit 50%, I'm good. No, you really want to be striving towards like that 80% mark in order to get a really, really, really good MCAT score, but keep doing that back and forth. So practice questions, revisiting the content of the stuff you missed, questions, revisiting content, questions, keep doing this until that score gets extremely high. And then you're going to start seeing a lot of movement within your score. Okay. Last concept before we talk to our MS1 on the call is not sure how many of you guys are familiar with the concept of spaced repetition, but spaced repetition is an old concept that was developed in 1885, and it's based on the forgetting curve. Okay, so Hermann Ebbinghaus developed this in 1885, and what the forgetting curve says is that when we're looking at memory retention, if you just learn something, right? So if you tell me your phone number and I repeat it back to you, that's immediate recall because I just remembered it, right? But if I don't keep saying if I stop saying your phone number over and over again, after about 20 minutes, I'm probably like, what were those last four numbers again, right? It starts to kind of seep out of my brain. After an hour, we're probably down to around 45%. 9 hours, you can see we're less than 40%. And if you have not looked at any of the newly learned content in more than 2 days, you're probably down to about 20%. That's because you're not a robot. You're not Siri. You're not Google, right? You're a human being. And the way the human brain works is it's going to store information at different rates, and information that's been learned over a longer period of time, that information is going to be easier to recall than something you just learned. Okay. So in order to commit information to memory in the way that you need to for the MCAT, you have to keep reviewing this information to spike that memory back up to 100%, where it is for immediate recall. If you keep doing that, the curve will eventually flatten out, and now you have learned something, right? So you're not a bad standardized test taker. You maybe aren't reviewing enough, because there is a substantial amount of memorization that you need to do for the MCAT. And those details, sometimes when we're learning new information, those details are just seeping out the bottom. You need to do something to plug that hole and maintain that information into your brain. And the best way to do that is through review. Now, there's great tech tools out there that you can use to do that. There's Anki. Blueprint has free flashcards that has spaced repetition built into it. You can make your own flashcards manually and do manual spaced repetition. You could do Quizlet and kind of hack it for spaced repetition. There's all kind of different things that you can do. In terms of this, you can even do a incorrect journal and then constantly read over your notes. So if Anki's a little bit of a learning curve for you, you don't have to use it. You can constantly read over your notes in your notebook, but you have to be intentional about this. So again, you're not a bad standardized test taker. You just need to evaluate, where am I in terms of my review and how am I doing in terms of that? Okay. All right, so that is some of my tips in the limited amount of time that we have today together. So I'm going to introduce or have our MS1 on the panel go ahead and introduce herself, and then I'm going to ask her a series of questions so we can hear her story.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. I'm learning a lot from Dr. Wynn. My name is Aluchi. I'm a first-year medical student at the University of Maryland in Baltimore, Maryland. I went to Hopkins for undergrad, graduated this past May, majored in public health, minored in business-related stuff. But right now, as a first year, I'm interested in anesthesia. So we'll see what happens in 2-3 years. But that's a bit about me.
Thank you so much. So my first question I have for you is, what skills do you think are important to build before taking the MCAT? So thinking, if you think back, what skills were maybe important that you built over time?
Right. Okay. So before entering the MCAT, I would suggest learning how to believe in yourself. Also, the things I'm going to say are going to reflect also what she was saying. Learning to believe in yourself, trusting your ability as a student, as a test taker, as a learner, and more importantly, as an answerer. So when you put down an answer, trust that that is the answer that you meant to put down, and not second guessing yourself, but believing I put this answer down for a reason. Just because the MCAT is really a mental test more than anything. So make sure you are strong up there in terms of how you answer questions. Also work on reducing negative self-talk. If that is something that you do, learn to reduce that so that when you are studying for the exam or taking the exam, you are your best you are your own cheerleader and like supporting yourself and egging yourself on instead of like telling yourself things that will bring you down during the test. Because having a bad mood or just feeling sad can definitely reduce your score and make you answer things wrong that you know how to do. Another skill to do before the MCAT or to work on is to learn how to read with purpose and read with intention. So that means learning to read, looking for the true purpose or the main idea or the goal of whatever it is that you're reading. This is really helpful in the MCAT because a lot of it is reading comprehension. So you can study as much as you want, you can learn as many things as you want, but if you don't understand the passage at hand, then what are you really accomplishing? Because you're just missing the goal entirely. So definitely work on believing in yourself, reducing negative self-talk, increasing positive self-talk, and then reading with intention and purpose.
Thank you. Those are awesome suggestions and skills. And Lucci is so right about believing in yourself, because if you sit down and you already feel defeated, that actually sets the stage for how you view yourself as a test taker. And again, you're not a bad test taker. There's probably an area that needs some love. And once you fix that and gain that, you're going to see that turnaround. Okay. So now I'd like to hear, what are your thoughts on the MCAT before starting medical school? And what are your thoughts on the MCAT after starting medical school?
Okay. So the truth, before studying medical school, I was really intimidated by the MCAT. I did the SAT multiple times in high school, and I was just like, oh, I'm so scared for the MCAT. And then during the actual MCAT season and doing it, I was the truth frustrated by the MCAT. It's a big test, I was trying my best, but it was a lot of work. But now that I've like gone past the MCAT and I'm now in med school, it's early days in med school, but still, post MCAT, I really appreciate the MCAT now, which is so odd. And it's the reason I'm here today because I texted Dr. Wynn to tell her I appreciate the MCAT. And so this is like truth. She didn't tell me to say any of these things. But yeah, I appreciate the MCAT for these reasons, and I've listed them out. I feel like the MCAT has given me a lot of confidence in myself just because MCAT was such a hard test. And the fact that I was able to do it, the fact that I was able to display those skills of dedication, motivation, being able to be so organized the way that I was to accomplish that test, regardless of the score. I'm not talking about the number, I'm talking about the skills that I acquired and that I showed. Those character traits I am proud about. So I appreciate the MCAT for giving me that confidence in myself. And then another reason I appreciate the MCAT is because it showed me how to be very calm now that I am in medical school. The MCAT, to be honest, isn't like I do the MCAT and I move on, I'm never going to do that again. It's like every day in med school feels like the MCAT to an extent because every day you're getting a lot of information. And just like the MCAT, you need to be calm during every single day of medical school. If not, your head is going to implode because you can't be stressed every single day to that extent. So it taught me to be calm. The MCAT also showed me how to focus at the question at hand. So during our questions like we get in med school, sometimes it'll be like a blurb, it's a lot of information that they're saying. But I learned from the MCAT, okay, cool, this blurb is cute. What is the question at hand? What am I looking for? What am I answering? So that I can actually apply what I studied to the question, which is key. Let's see. Okay, I wrote down notes. So, okay, the MCAT also showed me that I am 100% okay with being wrong. The caveat to that though is that I'm okay with being wrong before the exam, before the test. On the test, I need to be correct, but now that it's not yet the test, this is an opportunity for me to be right on the test. Now I have a better relationship with being incorrect or getting things wrong when I'm practicing, when I'm studying, when I'm reviewing before the test, because I'm like, okay, this is wrong, but this is going to be correct by the time I'm taking the test. And so that relationship I have with failure has changed. So I appreciate the MCAT for that as well. It reduces your stress a lot in medical school. And then last reason I appreciate the MCAT is because I learned the power of process of elimination. Dr. Wynn really honed this in for me when I was studying for the MCAT, because I used to think I need to know everything about everything. If I don't know this one word in the corner of the question, then I'm gonna get this wrong. And she's like, that's not even like what they're asking you though. That's just like a side word in the question. Like, what are they actually asking you? And then when I would focus on that, I'm like, oh, I actually kind of know this. Or I would look through the answer choices and be like, okay, I know this is wrong, so that's gone. This is wrong, so that's gone. I'm left with three answer choices and then leverage, figure things out. But I've learned the process of elimination. I've learned that process of elimination is really key and it's your best friend in the MCAT and also in medical school. Trust what you do know, leverage that, and then solve the question. You don't need to know everything. So those are a few reasons that I appreciate the MCAT now, post the MCAT, of course.
Yeah, thank you so much. You said something that was extremely powerful. I mean, everything you just said was powerful, but you said your relationship with failure. And that is so powerful. Like I literally want to do a talk about it. But your relationship with failure and being comfortable with
Yeah.
failure. And, you know, as adults, like as kids, we're comfortable with failure, right? Like when we're learning how to walk, I've watched my nieces learn how to walk and they fall a lot. And then they just get up and do it again.
Yeah.
But as adults, you know, we don't like that. You know, it doesn't feel good to us, right?
Yeah.
So we do have to become, you know, more childlike or comfortable to say, well, that didn't go well. Let
Yeah.
me try again. Let me figure out, let me evaluate, let me assess what didn't go well. And that's part of that. You probably feel like you're assessing your progress every single day, right? Or like you're
Yeah.
assessing yourself every single day. And the more comfortable you are with that assessment and being honest with yourself, like, I don't know that like I should, the higher your scores will be. So that's awesome. Um, so thinking of yourself as a future physician, what skills did you build during the MCAT that are going to be useful for you, like lifelong, in terms of your lifelong learning as a future physician?
That's a good question because you're right. Like the MCAT is to prepare us, believe it or not, for the future. Hard to believe then, but I feel like the MCAT has shown me how to manage my nerves and manage my emotions, which would be very key as a physician. As a physician, you're taking care of people's lives and preserving life to an extent. And that's a very high stress situation you're in every single day. Like someone's life is in your hands. So now post MCAT, I've learned that, you know, I need to be calm. I need to assess what am I solving? And I need to put all of 100% of my focus and my energy into resolving that situation. Yes, I'm nervous. Yes, I'm scared. Yes, I'm confused. Okay, put that aside. What do I know? Let me solve the question. So managing my emotions has been key, and I think that'll help me as a doctor. MCAT has also shown me how to adjust and be dynamic to new situations. Because like I said, every day in med school, they throw a lot of information at you, and every single day you're swimming or you know, what's the other word where you're just waiting? You might be waiting, you might not be swimming. Every single day you're waiting or swimming in like all the information that's thrown at you in med school. As a physician, it's the same thing when you encounter a patient. They're going to tell you a lot of information, all their symptoms, what they're going through, their history, their comorbidities that they have, what their friend told them that they have, all this stuff. And being able to adjust and be dynamic to that. The MCAT has shown me how to do that as well to an extent, or to have those character traits. And then lastly, again, it goes back to MCAT has shown me to believe in myself, especially when things are unfamiliar and things are new. Instead of being like, I'm so scared, I don't know this. Instead, I think, okay, what do I know? And then I leverage what I know to handle the situation. Or at the very least, I'm like, I know this. And that brings me some sense of peace, some sense of calm for the situation. Because like I said, managing your emotions, blocking out all the noise is key. And I think all those skills would be key as a physician in the future.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up there because I
Okay.
want to make sure that we have enough time. So the three of us now will be answering questions from the audience. So Aluchi as well, feel free to jump in and answer questions. This is kind of an open forum. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Sturgis. Aluchi, thank you so much for your powerful words and for being here today. I know you are super busy, so I really do appreciate it. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Sturgis.
Awesome, Malushi and Dr. Wynn. That was an amazing presentation. And I love the way that you guys connected the MCAT to lifelong learning, because in so many of those comments, I was like, yep, that's my life in the emergency department daily. I don't know it all, right? And I think that's one of the things that we have to all get comfortable with, but I do know enough to figure it out, right? And that's, I love the way that you introduced the concept that the MCAT is the first opportunity for us to figure that out. So a few housekeeping things I wanted to just kind of go back over before we start with questions. It's just to remind everyone that this presentation is recorded. It will be available in the virtual auditorium in about 24 hours. And it will be available, I saw someone mention, for about 30 days. So definitely check that out if you want to go back through this presentation. In the past, we have not made these slides available, but based off of feedback, we can definitely take that into consideration. All right, so let's jump into questions. I've combed through many of the questions in the comment, and we're just going to start with a few of them. Do you have any advice for increasing stamina during the MCAT and for not getting frustrated or burned out during the exam?
Yeah, so I would say, well, I have a couple things. Number one, the most obvious advice you're going to see is to practice, right? So practice answering questions, practice for sitting down for long periods of time. That doesn't always have to happen within a practice exam setting, but you do want to carve out time to study for long periods of time, right? So if you can, like once a week on a Saturday, try to carve out 6 or 7 hours for your brain to be on and processing information. The other thing that I've noticed in terms of students getting exhausted during the exam or feeling burnout during the exam is because you're using so much brain power to make decisions. And a lot of your energy is getting burned up with, oh my gosh, okay, this isn't going well. Oh my gosh, I'm probably not getting the score I want. Oh, I'm never going to be able to become a doctor. It's getting burned up by a lot of this extracurricular commentary. And when I coach students, if I hear all this commentary, I'm like, what's all this huffing and puffing? Because you don't realize it, but it's actually burning energy for you to be so worried and like amped up. So practicing what Oluchi was talking about in terms of remaining calm can actually help preserve a lot of your energy. You have to practice staying calm and preserving your energy. So when you get to the actual exam, that comes out in that way as well. So that's some of my kind of thoughts, but definitely practice, practice, practice. I'm not talking about practice exams. I'm talking about practice with longer periods of your stamina. If you think of like a couch to 5K run, you get off the couch and you do these smaller intervals, and then eventually you're able to run a 5K. So you can start out with studying for a few hours, but eventually towards the end, you want to keep stretching that practice out. That will help increase your stamina.
I love it. I love using the couch to 5K analogy with students too. So there were a couple questions about the 3,500 question recommendation. And just to clarify, for 3,500 questions, were you recommending that for all sections or per section?
So that's all sections overall. That's total. Just before you sit down and take the MCAT, just recommending that you practice that much. And I give a number, it was like approximately, but I give a number because sometimes students are like really selling themselves short on how much practice they actually need. And I recently even talked to a student, they did like maybe 500 questions and went to go take it. And they said, I'm a bad test taker. I'm like, no, you just didn't practice enough. I mean, you were way short of what myself and other learning specialists really do recommend. So that's overall. And I think Oluchi probably did that many as well. Yeah, maybe even more. Yeah, you did a lot of practice questions. I'm sure even now you're swimming in practice questions in med school. So yeah.
So the next question, if you cannot afford to take a MCAT tutoring course, what are other ways that you can study effectively?
I'll start off with this. I did not take an MCAT tutoring course. I did have a lot of support from like other people. So Dr. Wynn was a huge support system for me. So like someone that's encouraging you, that will give you advice, just hyping you up, I think is very important. Aside from that, I would watch videos on YouTube, get ideas from other people to see what they did. I think a sound schedule is key if you don't have a course that you're taking. I've heard from people who took courses that they liked the course because it gave them a structure, like every single day I'm doing this, I'm doing this. Or if you have a lot going on in your life, the course would be like, I'm sitting down, I'm doing it. I think that's one of the big pros of the course. So a schedule that you actually stick to, that you adhere to, have people that maybe hold you accountable if you struggle with staying on that schedule will be key if you are not doing a course. Aside from that, I think Anki is very helpful. If you haven't heard of it before, when you get to med school, you probably hear about it all day long, but it's the space repetition thing. Dr. Wynn had mentioned it earlier. Using that during the MCAT process is really helpful as well because it allows you to see information over and over and over and over. And that is key to memorizing and remembering things at the level that you need to for the exam. So that's all I've got.
Yeah, one other thing that you could do. So if you are still in undergrad, making use of your the tutors on campus, help rooms on campus, you can take those problems in there. If they have like help rooms, you can do that. There's also study groups that you can join, throw it out on Facebook and your inner circle, social media, kind of connecting with people from all over the United States, and you guys can help each other. One great thing that you guys could do, form a study group with some people who you might know are taking the MCAT, or maybe you don't know them, they're just a bunch of strangers. Get together and form a study group, and then each one of you teach the group about a concept, and just rotate that around, right? So maybe every other day, someone take a topic, and then you're going to teach the group. And but here's my caveat to this: you have to teach a topic that you don't know. Don't pick a topic that you know and then say, "Ah, I feel so good. I just taught that. That was great." I'm like, that didn't help your score though. You should look at the list and say, ooh, what's the one thing on here that I don't know about? And that's what you should teach the group. That's going to help. That's an elaboration technique. It is evidence-based in terms of helping your score. So think outside the box. You don't have to spend $2,500 in order to get a good score. Think outside the box. Now, if you do have $2,500 and you're thinking about a prep course, let me just give you two pieces of advice. Number one, you should always try to attend a class for free before you pay any money. A lot of the prep courses have like trial courses that you can sign up. Go to a free class before you pay any money and say, do I like this? Is this going to fit into my lifestyle? Am I going to be able to be successful in this? The other thing is, if you do some of the trial classes and you're like, I don't think this is for me, but I still want some assistance, you can go on a tutoring website like Google. I know there's tutors on Fiverr, there's tutors on Wyzant, like there's peer tutors that you could hire, and you could take that $2,500 and hire a tutor for $25 an hour or $30 an hour. You could still do something like that and get some individualized help. But yeah, I would say try to sign up for a preview class before you do anything to see if you're actually going to really use it and it's super helpful.
Great. So the next question, how do you best review questions that you got incorrect?
I'll let Aluchi start off with this one.
Okay, so questions you get incorrect. Okay, during the MCAT, the ones that I got wrong, I'm trying to remember, it was 2 years ago. I would recognize I got them wrong. I'd be okay with it. So I'm not like yelling at myself like, oh my gosh, I failed, I'm not smart. And then I would redo those questions. So one, I would go back and I would learn it. And then I would redo those questions later on. And I think I can apply it now to more like med school because it's like fresh and I'm actually doing it. The questions I get wrong in med school, I won't review it immediately. I'll just spend some time throughout the following week learning it slowly alongside all the other stuff that I'm learning for that week. And then I'll come back to it after some time and I've learned it just on my own and see if I get it right. Because sometimes getting it wrong, it's not because you aren't smart or don't know it. It's just because there's so much that you're learning that you maybe haven't seen it enough. So I just give myself more time to see it more, to engage with it more, come back to it, do those wrong questions again. If I get it right, okay, cool. I just needed to see it more. I know it now. If I get it wrong again the second time that I did it, that means I fundamentally am struggling with that concept and I need to spend some dedicated time working on that concept. It's not because I haven't seen it enough. It's because it's hard for me or I'm not connecting some dots that need to be connected. So yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with all that. I think another thing that students do in terms of when they're reviewing their questions is they get so focused on what content didn't I know, and you have to spend a little bit of time with what your thought process was, because that's the only way. Like, and be very, very honest with yourself. You need to understand and have that honest conversation of, was this content, did I not know this content, or was this test taking, did I do know the I did know the content, I didn't apply what I knew correctly. So the more that you are in tune with your brain about which one it is, the easier it is to review. Now, one thing I will say is that I think students sometimes can use the review process. And, I was talking to a student and like, I spent a week reviewing my exam. I'm like, wow, why are we reviewing an exam over a week? Okay. So, and this is sometimes because they're also just going so deep and combing over what they got right. And that's great, right? You do want to look at what you got right, but sitting in that to make yourself feel better is not necessarily helping your score, right? So, what I would recommend in terms of review, if you're starting out reviewing, don't start with your corrects. Start with your incorrects. That's when you have the most energy. That's when things are fresher in your mind about what your thought process was. Start there. And then later, when you have time, comb through your corrects, because you knew that information, you got it right. If you got it right today, you're more than likely going to get it right come test time. Start with your incorrects. Do not click on the corrects, because I've seen students pouring over their corrects because it feels better. But that's not where the good learning is, right? The good learning is not within our comfort zone. And that's what makes parts of this uncomfortable. All the good learning is where we're uncomfortable. So the more uncomfortable you make yourself while reviewing, the more your score will go up. Okay. So yeah, that's a suggestion.
Yeah, I love the fact that you guys keep coming back to the concept of being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because if there was one takeaway from this, you really do have to be brutally honest with yourself and become comfortable and lean in to the uncomfortable parts and lean into the hard work that it takes to study for these exams. So there were several questions about repeat MCAT takers. So I'm going to kind of give you guys a few questions about that. But the first one is, how do we know if we should retake the overall exam if our overall score was good, but we did really poor on one section?
So I think you have to take a look at your goals in terms of where you're applying, because does your overall score align with does it make it possible that you can apply for that medical school and you're somewhere in the range of who they're admitting, and you can see that information on the MSAR, which has a record of the medical schools and their previous incoming class. So there's no right or wrong answer to like, what score do I need? Or this section was low and this section was higher. And like, what should I do? You have to look at your own goals. So if you got a 500 and your goal, like your dream medical school is Hopkins, then you might have to take a look at, when you go on the MSAR and you're taking a look at what does that look like? If you're off the mark, then that's where you have to say, okay, do I want to retake this, right? So I would base it more on what your goals are, like your personal goals. Do you have a dream school? Do you have, you know, dream programs that you want on the table, like as an option for you, and maybe do it based on that way. Um, because there's no rhyme or reason necessarily to how every single medical school in America is going to view some individual like section differences within your score. It's all going to be so completely different in terms of how it's viewed.
Um, I also wanted to happen in this because I took my test 2 times. So another thing to consider before retaking is if you feel like there's something you can actually change or improve or work on to make your score better, is there more you can give to the MCAT to see a difference next time? If you like fully reflect deeply and you're like, okay, I did everything I could do. There's nothing more I can change, or I feel like that was all I have to give, and you're proud of yourself and you feel like that's you, that's the score I got. Hey, take it or leave it. Then maybe don't retake it because there's no point retaking it if you're not going to change anything. It's going to be the same score. But if you do feel like after reflecting, I could have done this, or I didn't have enough time, or I was stressed out that day, or there was a lot of negative self-talk, or I didn't work on this, XYZ, and those could be addressed moving forward, then go ahead, retake it if you have more like gusto in you.
Great. And then there's a question about how much time should I take to spend for the exam? And I think you kind of got at this, Alucci, when you were talking about making sure there's something that you've done. But if you could both just address how much time should people spend studying for the exam prior to taking it, especially if they're retaking it.
Okay. So I personally have this huge theory that people should take, or a lot, a year for the exam. And I say that just because that gives room for you to mess up, make mistakes, even maybe retake the exam. Just because the MCAT, it's so I can't call it with the MCAT. I really just don't know with it a lot of the time. So give yourself room to shake and bake. And then if you 3 months is enough, because I think that's the standard, 3 months of studying. If that's enough, you take the exam, you're cool, you're happy with it, great. Life is good. But if that isn't the case for a lot of people, like myself, 3 months wasn't enough. I was able to extend it, and it was safe for me to still be able to apply when I wanted to apply. I wasn't scared that, oh my gosh, because of my MCAT, I'm going to have to push back another year. So I think a year is a good amount of time to at least allow for mistakes to happen or for life to happen. So that's what my theory is, but Dr. Wynn can say the truth.
Yeah, I'm gonna concur. I if you look, I do feel like the 3 month advice is a little outdated. A lot of that number came from the old MCAT, which was shorter. So the old MCAT was like 4.5 hours. This MCAT is a lot longer. So when we think about like the time has, greatly increased, you're also going to need to increase how long you're studying. I think 6 months is probably a good baseline, and then it can go up or down. So it can go down if you take a diagnostic when you're first starting to study. Let's say you take a diagnostic and you get a 510. You don't need to study for 6 months, more than likely. You need to do a lot of review, refresh, practice, and go take it. It needs to go up if, number one, you do a diagnostic exam and you're further away from your goal score. But number two, if you fall into the categories that I talked about earlier, like you had a lower GPA, you are further away from content, you're missing a prereq or two, or well, probably not two, but if you're missing a prereq. So I saw a lot of questions in the Q&A about what do I mean by how much more time? That has to be based on how busy you are as well. There's no standard amount of time. If you're super busy, if you're in 5 clubs and you babysit and you spend a lot of time with your friends and family you're going to need more time. So you have to sit down and like evaluate your life and figure out per week, how many hours do I have to study for the MCAT, not study for your classes, not do everything else on the sun, like pure MCAT time. And then you can see how many hours that is and how much you need to get done. And if the math isn't mathing, then that's something is going to have to give with that. But yeah, that has to be based on your own individual life. But yeah, so it's going to go up or down depending on some of those factors. So hopefully that was helpful.
Absolutely. And I sit on our admissions board and I tell people all the time, I've seen people take the MCAT in 3 months, do worse, do the same, and do better, right? It's more, it has more to do with how you're studying and, how you're dealing with all the other components that Dr. Wynn talked about, other than just the amount of time. The amount of time is not the golden ticket. It's how you're studying that's going to make a big difference. Okay, we're getting to the end of our Q&A time. And so there are a lot of questions kind of in the chat about prerequisites and classes, that just asking what classes you specifically recommend. And I know that we put the guide in the chat, but I just wanted to give an opportunity for you both to talk about, are there specific prerequisites that you absolutely think students should take before they sit for the exam?
I think biochemistry is very key to take prior to the MCAT, just because biochem involves biology, it involves chemistry, and it involves a little bit of physics, low key. It's just very multidynamic. And so I just think it taps into a lot of things that if you're missing biochem from your prerequisites, taking the MCAT, there's going to be a lot of holes in low-key different sections of the exam that could have helped from biochem. And also to add to that, biochem, it's very what's the word? There's a lot of things connected to it. So the questions that you'll get that are biochem related, it's like it's not just one thing you can study and know it. There's like a whole pathway for it. So knowing those or having a familiarity with those pathways will be very helpful before going to the test, and then just getting random pieces here and there, and then it's not really connecting. So biochem for me, key.
Yeah, I also just dropped the link to what's on the MCAT in the chat. So there's a document on the AAMC website called What's on the MCAT that lays out the prereqs that are recommended by the AAMC, and also at what point did you more than likely learn that information within your prereqs. I would highly recommend to check out this document, familiarize yourself with this document. And if you're on this call and you're taking the MCAT past May, and maybe you still have prereqs to do, have that document open alongside of the class that you're taking so you can check off when you hit that information within your class. So that way, when the class ends and there's like maybe 3 or 4 concepts that you guys didn't cover, then you can go back and watch YouTube videos on those concepts or whatever you might need to do. But use that as a living document alongside your classes, especially if you're on this call and the MCAT is further out for you.
And to wrap us up, I think it'd be nice to end on a positive note. There was a question that said, what does positive self-talk look like relative to the MCAT? So I would love for, each of you, I'll start going through this because I definitely still have this conversation with students as it pertains to step 1 and step 2 and their shelf exams while they're in medical school. And the biggest thing I tell students is getting a low percentage or getting a lot of things wrong isn't bad, right? So if you sit down and you do questions and you get 40% correct, you got 40% correct, but guess what? You just identified 60% of the content that you need to study, right? The 40% isn't really it. It's that 60% now becomes your golden ticket. If you can learn that, your score goes up. So every time you identify something that you don't know, you found the golden ticket. You found the prize in the middle of the Cracker Jack box. Like, that's what you were looking for. That's why you were doing the questions, was to figure out what you don't know so that you can learn that thing and you can keep going. So just trying to reframe how you look at incorrect questions is super helpful.
Okay, I know we're running out of time. A really quick example of self-talk that I used was saying the thing earlier I said about this better be correct by the time I get to the test. So saying that, for me at least, I get to move forward. I'm like, okay, it's fine. It's going to be fine by the test.
Yeah, and I'll just end with stop putting yourself down. Remember, your sentences are sentencing you. So you have to be very careful about what you're actually putting out in the atmosphere about yourself. Stop with the negative self-talk. If you hear yourself doing it, try to be like, wait, why did I just say that about myself? And try to get back to baseline. So be very, very careful about what you're sentencing yourself to. Thank you guys so much for being here. Hopefully this was helpful. And I'll turn it back over to Dr. Sturgeon.
All right. Thank you so much. Remember, the recording will be available in 24 hours. Have a great day.